money and the career isn't going to get me. It'll get you a certain type of woman, and like, and I tell my clients this all the time. It's like, if you just wanted a girlfriend, like, you could probably go out and find that today. But you don't just want any girlfriend. You want somebody who's well-rounded, who is you're attracted to, who is smart, who is successful in whatever, not necessarily financially that necessarily, but, in their field, they have passions. And to find someone like that, that is well-rounded, you also have to be well-rounded. So just having the money isn't enough. You can attract a certain type of girl with just the money, but if you're not also fun to be around and you don't know how to make her feel good, then you're not going to get the top of the top, which is what a lot of people, they want. They want someone who is the whole package.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I've got probably the most qualified dating expert in the U.S. joining me on this podcast episode, Blaine Anderson. You're probably like the number one dating coach in the U.S. for men. Would you say you're pretty up there?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, let's talk about dating. Let's talk about like the wonder and magic of dating. And I know like for a lot of your clientele, you work with men and you build huge brand for yourself, whether folks can check out you on Instagram, Times Square now. And I always feel like for dating, for a lot of men that may be kind of newer, like we're just not as seasoned, it's like a process. It's like, they got to say this, they got to do that. And it feels like a lot of homework. For me, I've always been the type of person like, okay, let's just go with it. Let's just have fun. So I'm curious, you being a coach, what does that feel like to you in terms of prescribing a process versus just like let them explore a natural charisma?
Yeah, I think if somebody has natural charisma and they're having fun and they're getting results, then great. No need to be prescriptive and have a process. But if somebody is not getting the results that they want, then evidently something they're doing is not working. And oftentimes a process can be helpful for diagnosing where things are not going well, and then also creating a system that allows them to execute on the steps necessary to, whether it's authentically market themselves or ask women out in a way that women want to go out with them, or follow the steps that are expected dating. So I think there's not one shoe that fits everybody in this sense, but the type of client I work with typically is looking for a process because they recognize something they're currently doing isn't working.
Got it. It's kind of having that self-awareness. So where would you say a lot of men fall short? I know you're huge on men approaching women, but where would you say they fall short?
There's a few things that I see, especially within my clientele, men getting wrong. One is not sticking their neck out enough. So that comes into the approaching, like not taking enough risks. In some sense, dating is a numbers game in the sense that you do need to approach a lot of women. It's not a numbers game in the sense that if you're doing something wrong, doing it wrong more times isn't going to get you the result that you want. Right. So it's twofold, figuring out like how to do it right and then doing that many times. So not sticking their neck out enough, and then also not being able to create chemistry and flirt. So a lot of the guys I work with are really smart. They're very intellectual, they have a very high IQ, but they aren't necessarily good at creating romantic connections or emotional or sexual connections with women. They're creating intellectual connections, which doesn't necessarily lead to a fruitful dating life. So those are the two things I see a lot.
Got it. On that second part you mentioned where like men are not creating chemistry, because I think to the risk part, you almost equate that to a numbers game. Okay, you've done enough, you improve your self-confidence, and then you maybe identify some faults or not. I feel like that's kind of conundrum because it seems like two buckets of guys. The guys that's really good at creating chemistry, they're just really fun, but then women might see them as like, oh, well, this guy is not really a provider. He's just kind of go with the flow. Where the guy who's got an IQ, who's got a stay-paying career, business or whatnot, now all of a sudden they don't really know. They're not able to speak a language of love. What's your thought on that? Is there like two buckets of people, or can we able to kind of bridge them somehow?
I would say the second bucket definitely exists. That's the one I talked about, the guy who's struggling to create romantic connection. And there's a lot of that. I think the guy who's really fun and fun to be around and charismatic probably isn't struggling with women. Like, that's not my client. Because if you are able to be fun, like, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can provide as well. But I don't feel like I see that many guys who are like, oh, I'm just like so fun and charismatic, but women aren't taking me seriously. That's much less of a at least a problem in this of what I see coming in.
Gotcha. Do you feel those people maybe perhaps for the right women that want to settle down, maybe that might be like a different conversation? It's like, oh, this guy's just not really father material, not serious material.
Yeah, and that's definitely a thing for sure. But you're probably at least still doing okay with getting on dates and having relationships. It just depends on the type of relationship they want.
Yeah. Because I spent a good number of my years, and it wasn't probably until I would say I start hitting my 30s, I realized, hey, I got to be an inner child again. I got to be more playful, have more fun, have more laughter, just show more range of emotion where I think so many more prescriptive, okay, you got to provide, you got to, how can you look yourself in the mirror if you don't like be able to provide for yourself? And then me growing up also in an Asian family, there was a lot of pressure in that as well. So I'm curious for a lot of guys out there that's just kind of thinking that maybe, hey, if I make enough money, things will fall in place. What's your message to that group of folks?
Yeah, I see that oftentimes guys who are in their 30s or 40s and have spent so much time focusing on their career, which is amazing, but then they find themselves in the situation like you described where it's like, oh, I'm not fun, I'm not being playful, I'm not able to attract the type of woman 100%. I want to be with because I'm missing this key point. And actually the money in the career isn't going to get me, it'll get you a certain type of woman, and like, and I tell my clients this all the time. It's like, if you just wanted a girlfriend, like you could probably go out and find that today. Totally. But you don't just want any girlfriend. You want somebody who's well-rounded, who is you're attracted to, who is smart, who is successful in whatever, not necessarily financially that necessarily, but, in their field, they have passions. And to find someone like that, that is well-rounded, you also have to be well-rounded. So just having the money isn't enough. You can attract a certain type of girl with just the money, but if you're not also fun to be around and you don't know how to make her feel good, then you're not going to get the top of the top, which is what a lot of people, they want. They want someone who is the whole package. Yeah,
and I think everybody wants that to a degree. We want to be able to connect with that person to more than just like, oh, this is more of a transaction, which if you have a great career, that's kind of all you kind of bring to the table. You feel secure that you're going to have a roof over your head, but then you're not going to feel like emotionally fulfilled.
Yeah, but a lot of women are going to want that emotional connection as well. They want the sexual connection as well. They want the romantic connection.
Exactly. So for a lot of men's like, okay, how do they explore a little bit more of like their childlike side? How do they have more fun? Like for me, I almost had to take like a step back and realize, okay, I might like when I think about when I'm 70, 80 years old, what would I look back and have a memorable life? What are things that I want to do? I'd be so proud of. Like I need to do more of that versus what society might tell me, okay, chase the money, chase the notoriety, chase the vanity, whatever that might be. I'm like, I'm chasing my life. So curious for a lot of guys, how do they embrace that side of them?
Yeah, well, I love what you just said. It's like, what are you going to be excited to talk about? Not only when you're 70, but when you're on a date next week. Yeah. She doesn't want to hear about your P&L statement at work, but she might like to hear about the rafting trip you went on, or the yoga retreat you did, or the pottery class you decided to take, Yeah. So find interesting hobbies, and you don't need to, these hobbies don't necessarily need to be interesting. You don't need to like pick a hobby like, oh, she is going to also do this hobby. The point is that it's something that you're passionate about and you're excited about and you can speak to it knowledgeably. That's one way at least to be, come at dating in a well-rounded capacity and having multiple angles to connect on is having hobbies. So that's one thing. And then also just the ability to be present on a date and not take yourself too seriously, laugh easily, smile easily. Yeah. And how someone gets to that point, it's different for everybody. Sure. But it might take some effort if you're used to being a very serious person at work. Yeah. It's hard to, then show up on a date and not be serious. So figure out, like, what gets you out of your head a little bit? What gets you back to that playful, childlike state? It could be working out. It could be watching comedy. It could be taking a comedy or an improv class. But something that physically or mentally shifts you from... Again, this is just a lot of my clients because they are successful at work. The serious, get the job done, manager mentality to the, okay, like, let's be playful, let's connect.
Yeah, it's like sell your resume. It's funny you say that because that type of men I describe, I'm thinking as a guy, do I want to have a beer with you after work? And a lot of those, it's like, if I have to be in meeting with you, great. But I'm not going to be there with you after work and then just catch up. If that's all you talk about is just like business, like I want to hear about your life, family, what excites you up. So you mentioned the importance of having a process. So for that group of men, is there maybe like a question or like an opener or conversation that can help them? Hey, this, if you start a conversation, lead a conversation this way, that can embrace more of your passion, like you mentioned, your hobbies, versus because a lot of guys
like on a date?
default. Yeah, on a date.
Yeah, I would say once you're on the date, you don't you don't want to be like you're rehearsing scripts that you have lined up. You want to let the conversation flow naturally, but you can absolutely come in with some topics or question ideas related to or around her hobbies and interests and your hobbies and interests. So I wouldn't say, when you're on a first or second or third date, you're going to have a lot of the same conversations. Sure. Why do you live where you live? What do you do for work? What do you do for fun? Who are your friends? So think about those questions that you know are going to come up in advance that are natural first or second date questions, and think about how you answer them. Do you answer them in a strictly logical, by the book, facts way? Or do you tell a fun story to get your point across? Do you have something that you're a one-liner where you're teasing yourself about, something? Think about those answers and don't, like I said, make a script for it, but do recognize like your underlying intention and tone when answering them.
That's good when you mentioned that, just understanding what your intentions are. And one thing I did mention, I feel like one particular statement I don't like to ask, whether it's just like on a friend or on a date, is I never like to ask, but I people ask that all the time. It's like, oh, what do you do for work? I always feel like, if I ask that question, it almost kind of subconsciously for me, kind of, or for a lot of people, kind of grade people. Oh, how much money this person make? What's their place in society? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I know this seems like a very general question, but I try to get to know the person.
Yeah, it's not I don't hate the question because like you said, it is getting to know them, and it's like most of us spend 8 hours a day doing our jobs, so it's like it does tell you a lot about them. But it doesn't usually steer the conversation in a fun, flirty direction. So while it's an acceptable thing to ask or be asked, if you're on a date, my recommendation would be, unless don't cut it off if like things are flowing and she's fascinated by your job, but recognize that it's probably not going to tee you up for creating that emotional romantic or connection I talked about. So maybe shift the conversation and move on. Another trap a lot of people fall into around that question is that it's easy to talk about. Most people are very comfortable talking about what they do. So if you're nervous on a first date and a girl asks that question because it's just the natural thing to ask, and then you go into a 30-minute conversation about it, you're probably not setting yourself up for, like I said, creating the type of connection you want. She might leave the date being like, oh, he's really smart, he's successful, but if she didn't have fun, then she's probably not going to want a second date.
Totally. So what are some questions that guys ask could really be spontaneous, could be fun? What are some of your go-tos, or maybe one or two?
Again, it's really about the person. So you want to ask relevant, authentic questions. So what makes sense to ask one girl isn't going to necessarily make sense to ask another girl. But so I wouldn't say don't just use prescriptive questions without thinking about it. Think about whether it makes sense. But if she likes travel, for example, then you might say like, what was your absolute favorite trip you've ever been on? Or if you could go on any place in the world tomorrow, where would it be? Those make sense for a girl who likes to travel. If this is somebody who's never left the state she lives in, probably not the question that is it might make her uncomfortable. She's not going to really know how to answer it.
Right.
So you want to think about how you're asking. Someone who's really into food, saying like, okay, last meal. That can be a really fun conversation just because you can debate different courses. It can set you up for a second date. Like, oh, okay, now I know she's like a huge dessert person. I can find a dessert spot for next time. Reference this conversation when asking about it. So looking also for through lines of if the date is going well. My favorite way to ask for a second date is to reference something from the first date. So maybe you talked about art. Okay, so you found an art gallery, or that she's really into bowling. Okay, you can use something relevant from the conversation then to tee up the next date so it feels authentic and that you were paying attention.
Yeah. And then just what you said is just kind of having that genuine connection with someone and say, hey, we have this in common. Let's see if we can have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, like, what happened in the case, like, you know what? You think they might like this girl for the typical guy, but they couldn't find any connection. They went through the gauntlet. It's like, wow, we don't have much in common. Mm-hmm. So they walk away from that situation, then they were just like, you know, what are your thoughts in that case? It's like,
yeah, like you aren't going to have a connection with a lot of people.
Sure,
you know,
totally.
Most people you probably won't. And I think a mistake I see guys making is pursuing a woman, whether it's before the first date or after the first date, just because of her, you're physically attracted to her and not because there's actually a connection. And then you're setting yourself up for, quote, rejection. So oftentimes, like, if a guy approaches a girl, there's nothing in common. Like, she doesn't really seem particularly interested in talking to him. But he asks her out anyway because he's thinking with his lizard brain, like, okay, but she's hot. She looks good in yoga pants, whatever it is. Like, I want to see. And then she says no. And then it's a hit to his confidence. It's like, well, that really shouldn't actually affect your confidence because if you really looked at the facts, like, was this a good person for you? No.
No.
And if you were the one to then say, like, okay, we've had a fine conversation, but she's not for me and I'm going to move on and not ask her out, then you're retaining the power. Yeah. You're not setting yourself up for something that probably was never going to work out anyway if you were really honest with yourself. So that's a really good way to sort of combat the cycle of rejection or getting a confidence hit when it's not necessary. Yeah. Keep the power. Be the one to choose.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a trap for a lot of guys. I know for me, it wasn't until I experienced this when you never really, I don't know, went on a date with a super beautiful gal, and I think this use the word like beauty trap. The guy see it's like really beautiful gal, and then they kind of let go of their non-negotiables.
Yeah.
They kind of bend. It's like, oh, okay, I can deal with this. Can you? That's like, no, you really can't. And I experienced that. And I wonder if there's a shortcut to this. The only way for me to kind of got over that, I had to got my heart broken a few times. Like, this was a wrong girl to begin with. All my friends kind of told me that. Is there a shortcut around that, or do most guys just have to go through what I went through and be in a bad situation to learn from your mistake? Yeah.
I mean, that's one way to learn from it, you know, and have that realization. I suppose the antidote is really like being confident in what you bring to the table. If you feel really strongly in what you bring to the table and have conviction about your non-negotiables and believe that, you know, you deserve those things, then you're probably going to be less likely to settle for somebody who doesn't have them despite their physical appearance. Yeah. So continuing to work on your not you personally, but like as any guy, their self-confidence, their worth, feeling confident in that is going to make you less likely to settle for somebody just because of, and their physical attractiveness. And for some guys, like, that never changes. Like, I've seen it with clients who it's like they continually go after the wrong girl because of this physical. Yeah. They're physically attracted to her. And maybe one day it changes, or maybe they end up settling and, you know, even marrying someone who they're physically attracted to, but don't actually share their values. Oh, and that's a nightmare. Yeah, I mean, it's not what I would want, and I think it's not what most people would want if they're being honest with themselves, but it certainly happens.
It's unfortunate because they're settling for the short-term excitement of like, oh, I got pursue this. So, you know, people respect me, have this like super beautiful girlfriend, whatnot. And then for the long-term suffering, it's like, oh, this girl's driving me crazy.
Yeah, because that wears off. I feel like no matter what somebody looks like, that the allure, the shiny object draw of that person is going to wear off in the long run. And then you're left with their personality and their values and your authentic connection. And so that's what you want, in my opinion, to optimize for if you're looking for a long-term relationship.
And you talk about working on self-confidence. I feel like for all men, we're always working on self-confidence. Self-confidence is kind of like healing in a sense that there's always like a higher plateau you can climb where you're capable of, and not just in the dating world, but like business, meeting people, and like even like this conversation I'm having with you. And one of the bigger things you are on for your brands, men should be approaching women more in person. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Why that is important?
Yeah. Well, just touching on the confidence thing too before getting into the approach. Like, everybody's always working on their confidence. Like, women as well. I think it's really easy to think the grass is always greener. Like, women are like, oh, men have it easier, and men are like, women have it easier. The fact is, like, dating is hard for everybody right now. So how can we all improve our confidence and our processes to meet in the middle, and more people can be in happy relationships. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Confidence is like the backbone of a successful dating life for both men and women. If you don't have confidence, the rest is going to be really hard to fulfill in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Including approaching. And so when I hear from clients, or not so much clients, but guys, like, oh, why do men have to be the one to approach women? And it's like, okay, well, you can do a couple things if you want women to approach you. You can be insanely handsome and ideally really tall.
Yeah.
And you can live in New York City, where the dating market is actually, it's one of the only cities I feel like where it's arguably more competitive for women. But outside of those two things, women just aren't going to approach men 99% of the time. And that comes down to biology. Yeah. It is the man's responsibility to approach. Yeah. And then it is the woman's responsibility to, she can then decide, like, okay, are we moving to the next step or not? At least top of funnel, women are the choosers. And, that's a whole nother biology lesson about why that's the case. So I feel like men really have a choice. Like, you can complain about it and be stuck single, or you can learn to confidently approach, attract amazing women, and start dating women you're excited about. Yeah. And the choice is really yours.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a master skill. And me saying this as a guy, for guys to have the ability to approach, and not just women, it could be a business venture. Yeah. And if you're okay, I'll share that. That's how I met you. I approached you at a group gathering. Yeah. No romantic interest whatsoever, because I know you're married. But I'm like, hey, this will be an amazing connection. We'd love to make a friend. And that's exactly how I was a little nervous at first, but you probably picked that up. Well, we had a fun out of it. We made a laugh out of it. Yeah, yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So, and then to that, and I'll share kind of like a funny story. So I do a lot of traveling, and then and I've always been an extrovert in my life. And so my line when I'm doing international, where like they speak outside of English, so I use the same, I don't want to say pickup line, but same introduction. My first line is, do you speak English? And a lot of times they say no. I'm like, crap. Then I'll go, 能说中文吗? Which means, do you speak Chinese? Then they say no. I'm like, crap. And I'm like, 日本語話しますか? Do you speak Japanese? Then they say no. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of screwed at that point. So outside, like, that's way like for me to just kind of have fun out there, just like approaching gals. And for like just approaching in general, is there like, should guys just like go with a spur of the moment, or just like first thing come to mind, or is there any like,
well, one of the things I feel like guys get wrong is they hesitate to approach because they feel like they need the perfect opener. Yeah. What am I going to say? How is it going to be funny? Is it going to be witty? And then they miss the opportunity. Yeah. And so if you don't have the perfect line, it doesn't mean you should miss the opportunity. Yeah. Just have a few generic lines that you can use, and use one of those. So like one of my favorite ones is just, I don't think we've met before. I wanted to introduce myself. Yeah, that works really well at a place like a gathering, a group gathering, your apartment building, a hobby area. So if it's like a yoga studio you go to often, saying like, hey, I don't think we've met before makes sense. If you're at the grocery store, that doesn't make as much sense. Yeah. If you're at a more like one-time place, like the grocery store, the street, even like a bar, you can say... The simplest line is like, hey, you caught my eye, and I'd kick myself later if I didn't say hello. My name's Blaine. Yeah. And that not every woman is going to want to talk to you, but the ones who are open to conversation are going to be receptive to that. And if you can just carry a short conversation from there, you are going to be better than most guys out there who aren't even approaching. And taking that back to the confidence thing, we talked about confidence as the backbone. You are displaying confidence by being able to approach. So even if a woman may not have picked you out of a lineup or swiped right on you on a dating app, your ability to approach in a confident way and carry a short but meaningful conversation could make her interested in you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how often would you say women get approached? Because
it's totally dependent on the woman, where she lives, where she spends her time.
Because I feel like a lot of my female friends, they just told me they don't really get approached that much. Yeah. Not like what it used to be. Yeah. Maybe like in their parents' days, or like it really feels like outside of school and maybe like a close work environment, that just stops happening. Everybody's kind of forced to go on a dating app nowadays.
Yes. Yeah. You're so right. Yeah. I conducted a survey of like, I think it was 13,000 single women in the US and the UK. And 95% of them said that they wish that they were approached more often. And this was single women, not every, like a non-single woman is probably not going to say she wishes she was approached more. And you can't necessarily tell if a woman is single or not before you approach her, but that's where it comes back to the numbers. If you're doing the steps correctly, it's a numbers game, because a lot of the women you approach won't be single or won't be interested in you for whatever reason. And that's okay, because also if you are able to read the signs, like, okay, she's not a good fit for me, either because she's not interested or she's not single or we don't have things in common, and you don't ask her out, there's nothing to be, you know, you weren't rejected. There's nothing to take your confidence out, like the wind out of your sails. Like, if anything, you're probably going to walk away from that being like, wow, I'm really proud of myself. I started a conversation, I made a woman smile, and then I walked away, and that was it. Most interactions shouldn't end in you asking her out if it doesn't make sense. And I think that's something guys get wrong. They approach, and so then they feel like they have to ask for the number. So they're not looking for the signs of like whether or not that makes sense. And then they end up getting rejected, and then they feel bad about it. And it's this perpetuating cycle. Whereas if they were following the right steps, looking for the signs that it makes sense to ask her out, and only asking someone out when they see those signs, which might be 20% of the time or even less.
I would say about 10% for me, because number one thing I look at within like 10, 15 seconds, do I want to be friends with this person? Can I even be friends with it? Can we connect? But kind of to your point, if this person or she's giving off like a bad vibe, it's just like kind of close off. Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Have a nice day. That's it. Walk away.
Yeah, walk away.
She doesn't know you. She has no basis for judging you, so you shouldn't care what she thinks. She might be a total bitch, you know? Lots of people are.
You have absolutely no idea. So I'm curious, for the clients, you obviously help thousands of men. Any memorable stories that you like to share, or anything else?
Yeah, I think my favorite client stories or the favorite things I hear from clients is success, like when they have success. Okay. That's why I do what I do. It's why I love doing this, is getting those weekly, an email, you know, I'd say I get at least once a week an email from someone who's taken one of my courses saying, you know, I proposed to my girlfriend and she said yes, or I got married and, you know, it was the woman I met online after you did my profile review, or we just had a baby. Like, I love like those success stories because having someone say, you know, like, you changed my life, like that makes me feel so good, because I truly believe that you can have an amazing, fulfilling life single. You absolutely don't need a romantic partner to have a fulfilling life. But from my experience, I feel like nothing improves the quality of an already great life like having somebody to share it with. And so the fact that I can help men and women find that, you know, whether it's the women helping the men display themselves in a way that the women can see how amazing they are, and helping the men authentically market themselves so they can attract quality women, nothing makes me happier.
1,000%. And I definitely see you as a living example of that. You and your husband just works like such a well-oiled machine.
Oh, thank you.
And what you two do, so it's just, I definitely see what you mean by that. You could do it by yourself, but just so much more fulfilling, impactful, have somebody do with you on that journey. And I'm curious, you know, just because he is such like probably a big proponent with dating by Blaine. What's something that you appreciate about him that maybe not a lot of people know about?
I think I appreciate my husband's ability to be positive in a tough situation, you know, like he works really hard in all aspects of his life. So and that's not always fun, but he makes it fun. He loves to, you know, whether it's something around the house or something in his business, he's really good at seeing the positive in it and having fun with it.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So kind of on that note, like kind of, you know, wrapping this whole dating part, you know, when you work with like a clientele, and now that you're such like a global brand now, what's next for Blaine?
That's a good question. I have a few projects I'm working on that I'm not talking about quite yet. Besides that, I'm having a baby in the spring, in the winter. I don't know. We'll see when she arrives.
I don't know if y'all can see the camera baby bump. But
so that's definitely my biggest personal project at the moment.
I was just being
growing a human.
Are you excited?
Yeah, I'm very excited.
I can see the smile later up on your face. did you want to perhaps touch base on matchmaking or anything?
Yeah, that's yeah. Thank you for that prompt.
Yeah.
I am offering matchmaking, which is an exciting development. It's something I'd always kind of done on the side of Dating by Blaine for some of my one-on-one clients, but I just brought in a head of matchmaking to help scale that side of the business, and we're very excited about it. It's already going very well. We've had some great success stories, so matchmaking in 2025 is where it's at.
Got it. So for folks, now you've started this journey, which has been miraculous. 4 years ago in COVID, roughly around that time.
Yeah.
And then the growth you had this is just absolutely like Tesla during its heyday when it just ramped up.
Being compared to Tesla, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a true story. If y'all look what she's done, is any like moments that you really had overcame that you just didn't think that, oh man, this is gonna be a big challenge, big hurdle. Where there was a moment you had to hop on Shark Tank, but then end up paying out. Any risk you had to take in your business venture?
Consistently, like looking back at sort of pivotal moments within the business is when I took a risk and did something hard that didn't necessarily come naturally.
Yeah.
So choosing to post videos on Instagram with dating advice, I had my course first, and then it was like, okay, how do I get this in front of people? And, putting yourself out there on Instagram and calling yourself a dating coach or calling yourself an expert in whatever field it is tough. And to, record yourself on camera if that's not something you're familiar with, which I wasn't.
Totally.
Like, that is all, starting a podcast, like, again, putting yourself out there, like, saying you're doing this.
Absolutely.
That's very challenging. And it ties back to dating, like, putting yourself out there and approaching someone or trying a new skill or hobby as a way to meet more people or become more interesting. Those are hard things to do, and they get you out of your comfort zone, but you very rarely grow when you're in your comfort zone.
Ain't that the truth?
So I think, deciding to post videos on social media was a big one. Shark Tank, I was invited on Shark Tank. I decided to do that. Like, that was incredibly nerve-wracking, standing up on that stage in front of, these very successful people.
Yeah.
But it ultimately was great publicity and paid off. So, when something feels scary or challenging, that's usually a sign that you should do it.
Yeah, so henceforth for guys, if girls maybe make you feel a little scary, maybe you should go up and talk to her.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Approach her.
I think back to the approach thing and the putting yourself out there, a really good trick that I'll do with clients who are struggling to approach is tell yourself you're not actually allowed to ask for her phone number. You're not allowed to make it romantic.
I love that.
You're only allowed to start a conversation.
Yes.
And your only goal is to make her smile.
Oh, I love that.
And so just start there and do that for a few months until you feel really good and confident. Yeah. And then maybe you're allowed to start adding that in. And I've seen this with clients. It really helps them get over the hump of feeling nervous or sweating the outcome.
Yeah. Hey, you guys listening, actually, that should be a challenge for all the single guys, and I'll do it with you guys, actually. Maybe we'll post some videos where we just approach some random gals or girls just to make her day a little bit better. Make her, smile and then add some value and then, be someone's angel for a day. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, pay a genuine compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Dude, so this whole journey for Blaine, now that obviously for folks that see you on Instagram, you mentioned that, oh, I didn't want to get on camera. I was like that at first. I kind of built my whole business in real estate. I'm this guy in the shadow, just I don't want to, I don't want people to find out who I am. And then the more that I kind of just put my face out there, the more I connect with my audience, and that's really been paying off. So I'm curious for your journey. Obviously, the people see on Instagram, you create some of the most catchiest reel ever. So how did that practice? How was that mastery of skill for you to embrace a camera, be able to show your vulnerability, and then show you as a coach?
Yeah, it really just, with anything, I think on camera wise, takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
At first I would take one reel might take me 30 minutes to film because I would do so many takes and I'd watch it back and try again. And now, I can rip 10 reels in 30 minutes because I take the time to write them in advance. I script them in advance. I know the places to film that are going to be quiet and are going to have good lighting. And I'm just more confident in it because I've done it a lot of times, but there's really no just cheating practice there and seeing what works, post different types of content, see what hits for your audience. You usually can't just copy someone else's content and have it work for you.
Right.
You have to see what resonates with the people you're trying to reach.
Right. I love that so much because I really do feel, even from like a business entrepreneurship aspect, a lot of people might filter you out. Maybe they're starting off like, oh, this person's dating coach, I don't really resonate. I'm in business, I'm selling something else, so maybe like personal development. But y'all pay attention, watch her reels. Like y'all can learn so much how she designs her reels, so catchy, and it just draws you in. And I think that's one of your greatest strength that kind of draw me to you originally.
Oh, thank you.
How's this person able to do this? What's the magic formula that she's perfected right there? And then just so happened I had a chance to meet you in person, and that was quite a magical moment.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, because I still feel like it's a work in progress developing, reels as the algorithm changes, as my audience maybe gets saturated with one type of content. So it's always a work in progress. Unfortunately, when it comes to social media, you're never done. It's always evolving.
Exactly. It's ongoing homework. So in this stage of your game now, what's like a challenge for you? What's something that makes Blaine scared now that you talk about, like embrace the next thing that kind of scares you?
I honestly feel like the social media aspect, it's funny because like from the outside perspective, it's like, oh, like she's got it figured out, like it's working. But from my perspective, it's like, okay, how do I keep the views up? Okay, views are down. Like, how do I reach a larger audience? The algorithm has changed a lot on Instagram in the past few months, and so keeping up with that is definitely something that's on my mind, and figuring out what the next evolution of my content looks like.
Gotcha. So maybe for folks listening, one last question kind of out there. What does it feel like to live a life of wonder and possibility? What's Blaine's definition for that?
Wonder and possibility.
Yeah.
I think it's being willing and open to take risks and do things that scare you, going back to what we talked about before. Outside of my business as well, like outside of Dating by Blaine, I feel like some of the best outcomes in my life, some of the greatest adventures I've ever been on have been from because I took a risk or I did something that wasn't the obvious choice that other people might not have taken, whether that's been in my career or personal or where I moved, and that has always paid off for me tenfold. And I feel like I'm so grateful for my life, and I feel like I can really like wake up every day and say like, wow, I'm so lucky. I love the life I've built. But it wasn't just like, it didn't just happen and it didn't fall into my lap. It was like continually making choices that got me out of my comfort zone and that I was proud of, and working hard.
Yeah. And it's ironic you mentioned that, because just in my own journal reflecting, and everybody's like, you hear art advertising all the time, oh, go on venture here, go on venture there. And I think in today's world, a lot of people conflate adventure or like taking risks. Oh, I'm just go to a beach for a photo shoot or something. There's no risk involved in that. Yeah, like taking selfie, there's like no risks. You have to do something that kind of scares you with, and then to your point, something of the unknown. You don't know the outcome. You can put your best foot forward. And I feel like when the stakes are high, when there are actual consequences, whether you get declined by a gal or something and might get a little bit hit on your pride, that's when you learn. And so, so much appreciate that you touch base on that. And thank you so much for the conversation, Blaine.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely. Anywhere folks can reach out to you.
Yeah, super easy. Dating by Blaine across all social media, datingbyblaine.com. I have an application form if you're interested in working together, if you're interested in matchmaking, and I'll be in touch.
You got it. And I'll put all that information in my description so y'all can reach out to Blaine. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome.